Hey there, welcome to Life Stories. If you're new around here, this is where we dig up the kind of tales that stick with you. Real people, real moments, and the unexpected twists that make life worth talking about. Whether you're here to unwind or just love a good story, you're in the right place. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and let's dive into something incredible together. Imagine standing in a place that time forgot. The sun beats down on Willow Creek, Nevada, a speck of a town clinging to the edge of nowhere. Tumble-down wooden houses lean into the dry desert wind, their paint chipped away by years of neglect. Rusted signs creak above empty storefronts, and the streets stretch out silent, save for the occasional tumbleweed rolling by like a lonely traveler. It's the summer of 1982, and this town's on its last legs. Once it glittered with the promise of gold, a magnet for dreamers and fortune-seekers who carved a life out of these dusty hills back in the late 1800s. Miners filled the saloons, kids ran through the schoolyard, and the church bell rang out hope every Sunday. But that was then. Now, the mines are hollowed out, the gold's long gone, and so are most of the people. All that's left are 50 stubborn souls, too tied to the past to walk away, living in a place where hope feels like a stranger that stopped visiting years ago. Then, out of the shimmering heat on the horizon, he appears. Henry. No last name, no explanation, just Henry. He steps off a beat-up Greyhound bus one scorching afternoon, the kind of day where the air feels thick and the ground burns through your soles. His boots kick up clouds of red dust as he walks into town, a lone figure against the endless stretch of desert. He's maybe 50, give or take, with a face weathered like the land around him, lines etched deep from sun and time. A faded brown coat hangs off his frame, a wide-brimmed hat shades his eyes, and in his hand is that suitcase, old leather scratched and patched, a silent witness to miles no one can count. Those eyes, though, they're something else. Sharp, steady, like they're looking through the town, past the decay, to a story no one else remembers. The folks at the diner, one of the last holdouts in Willow Creek, watch him through smudged windows as he ambles down Main Street. Just another drifter, they mutter, over lukewarm coffee, figuring he'll be gone by sunrise. People pass through sometimes, lost souls, history buffs chasing ghosts, but they never stay. Henry's different. He doesn't look lost. He looks like he's found exactly where he needs to be. For the first few days, Henry keeps to himself. He rents a room above the diner from Mrs. Carter, a wiry old woman with gray hair pulled tight in a bun, who doesn't ask questions as long as the cash is up front. The room's nothing fancy, a sagging bed, a cracked mirror, a window that rattles when the wind picks up, but it suits him. Every evening, he drags a rickety chair onto the porch, sits with a mug of black coffee, and stares out at the town. The sun dips low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, and he just watches, like he's memorizing every broken plank, every faded sign. The townsfolk notice. They start whispering about the quiet man who doesn't fit their usual mold of wanderers. He's not loud or nosy like the tourists, not desperate like the stragglers who sometimes beg for a meal. He's just there, steady, like a rock in a river that's run dry. Then he starts asking questions. It's subtle at first, slipped into small talk at the diner counter or murmured to folks passing by. "What was this place like back in the day?" he asks, voice low and calm, almost like he's talking to himself. "Who built that saloon? What happened to the mines?" The locals shrug at first, giving him the short version. Gold ran out, people left, end of story. But Henry keeps at it, gentle but persistent, like he's peeling back layers of a tale they've forgotten how to tell. He listens as Tom Haskell, the diner owner with a grizzled beard and tired eyes, grumbles about the boom years when the town was alive, back when the streets buzzed with miners, merchants, and families dreaming big. He nods when Mrs. Carter shares how her granddad ran the general store, how she grew up counting pennies behind the counter. Each answer seems to sink into him, like pieces of a puzzle he's putting together in his head. They think he's just curious, maybe bored. They don't realize he's building something bigger. About a week in, Henry makes his move. It's a dusty Wednesday afternoon when he walks into the town hall, or what passes for it, a shack so worn it looks like a strong gust could knock it flat. Inside, a handful of residents are arguing, voices sharp with frustration. They're debating whether to sell the last scraps of Willow Creek to a developer from Reno who's itching to pave it over for a gas station and a cheap motel. It's a grim scene. 5 weathered faces around a table littered with coffee stains and despair, ready to sign away the only home they've ever known. Henry doesn't knock. He doesn't wait for an invitation. He just strides in, sets that battered suitcase on the table with a soft thud, and opens it up. The room falls silent, all eyes on him. Inside are rolled-up blueprints, maps so old the edges are crumbling, and a stack of papers tied with twine, yellowed from years of hiding. "I've got an idea," he says, his voice slicing through the tension like a knife through butter. "This town's not done yet." They stare at him, jaws slack, like he's just sprouted horns. Tom Haskell snorts, crossing his arms. "You crazy, mister?" But Henry doesn't flinch. He unrolls one of the maps. A detailed sketch of Willow Creek from its mining heyday, dotted with X's marking old shafts and lines tracing forgotten paths. He points to it with a steady hand. "There's gold here," he says. "Not in the ground, in the story." They blink, confused, but he keeps going. He's no stranger spinning wild yarns. Henry's an engineer, or was once. He spent years crisscrossing America, studying ghost towns like this one, learning their bones, their histories, their secrets. Willow Creek, he tells them, isn't just a pile of junk waiting to be bulldozed. It's a relic, a snapshot of the Wild West people would pay to see. His plan? Turn it into a living museum. Restore the saloon with its swinging doors, fix up the schoolhouse with its chipped blackboard, open the mines for guided tours. Make it a place where families can walk through history, run their hands over rusted pickaxes, feel the weight of a past that's still alive if you know where to look. "This town's got a heartbeat," he says. "We just gotta wake it up." The room stays quiet for a long moment. They're skeptical. How could they not be? 50 years of watching their world shrink doesn't breed optimism. "Who's footing the bill for this pipe dream?" Tom finally asks, voice gruff. Henry meets his gaze unflinching. "I am," he says. "To start." And with that, he pulls out a wad of cash from his coat pocket. Not a fortune, but enough to prove he's serious. "It's not charity," he explains. "It's an investment. In them. In Willow Creek. In something bigger than any one person in that dusty shack." The next morning, Henry's out there before the sun's fully up. He's got a hammer in one hand, a bucket of nails in the other, and he's banging away at the saloon's sagging porch. The sound echoes through the empty streets, sharp, rhythmic, like a heartbeat kicking back to life. He doesn't ask for help, doesn't expect it. He just works, sweat beading on his brow as the desert heat climbs. The saloon's a wreck, boards warped from years of neglect, windows cracked, the old sign barely legible. But Henry moves like he sees it whole again. Townsfolk peek out from behind curtains, drawn by the noise, the oddity of this stranger fixing what they'd given up on. It's strange, almost unsettling, watching him pour his own money into a place he's got no ties to. Where'd he get the cash? Why's he care? They don't ask. Not yet. They just watch. Then something shifts. By day 3, Tom Haskell shows up, ladder slung over his shoulder, muttering about how he can't let the guy work alone and look like a fool. Mrs. Carter follows, hauling a can of paint she'd stashed in her basement, saying it's a shame to let it go to waste. Soon there's a handful of them, old-timers with creaky joints, a couple of younger folks who'd stuck around out of loyalty. They start small, nailing loose planks, scrubbing grime off windows, clearing decades of junk from the schoolhouse. Henry doesn't boss them around. He just nods, points when they need direction, and keeps going. At night, he sits at the diner counter, sketching on napkins. Plans for the mine entrance, layouts for a ticket booth, a winding path for visitors through the town's heart. He talks them through it, voice calm but firm, like he's done this 100 times. Maybe he has. Word spreads slow at first, then picks up steam. A farmer from the next town over stops by to see what's up, then tells his cousin in Reno. A local paper runs a blurb about the mystery man fixing up Willow Creek, and suddenly there's a trickle of curious eyes, people who'd written the place off years ago. Henry doesn't pay it much mind. He's too busy hauling lumber, climbing ladders, showing Tom how to shore up the saloon's roof so it doesn't cave in the next time a storm rolls through. It's hard work, backbreaking at times, but there's a spark in it. a flicker of something they'd all forgotten. Hope, maybe. Or just the stubborn refusal to let the past die quiet. By spring 1984, Willow Creek starts looking like a different place. The saloon's back in business, its bar polished to a shine, walls lined with grainy photos of miners long gone. Tourists, small groups at first, lean on the counter, sipping soda while Tom spins yarns about the old days, half true and half embellished, but they eat it up. The schoolhouse gets a new roof, its dusty desks arranged like a classroom frozen in time. Kids on field trips scribble on slates, giggling as they pretend they're back in 1890, while their parents snap photos. Then there's the steam engine. They find it rusting in a barn a few miles out, an old beast from the mining days, abandoned when the tracks stopped running. Henry digs into his savings again, hires a truck to haul it in, and spends days scrubbing it clean with a couple of locals who've caught the bug. It sits proud in the town square now, a hulking monument to what Willow Creek once was, and maybe could be again. People start showing up. Families from Reno on weekend trips, retirees from California chasing nostalgia, history nuts with notebooks and cameras. They pay $5 a head to walk the mines, ducking through tunnels where Tom guides them, pointing out veins that glittered with gold a century ago. The store reopens, stocked with canned goods and souvenirs. A cafe pops up next door, serving pie and coffee to folks who linger longer than they planned. A gift shop follows, selling little gold panning kits that kids beg their parents to buy. It's not a boom like the old days, but it's something. Life. Willow Creek's not just hanging on anymore. It's growing, breathing, pulling itself up from the grave one shaky step at a time. But Henry doesn't stick around to see it bloom. Fall 1985 rolls in, crisp and golden, and just as the town hits its stride, he's gone. No warning, no farewell. One morning, his room above the diner's empty. Bed made, coffee mug washed, suitcase nowhere in sight. They find a note in the saloon scrawled on a napkin and tucked behind the bar. This was never about me. That's all he leaves them with. The townsfolk are stunned. They'd started thinking of him as theirs. A quiet fixture, a guy who'd earned his place among them. Sure, he didn't talk much, but he'd brought them back from the edge. Who walks away from that? They gather at the diner that night, swapping stories over pie, trying to piece him together. Was he a rich guy playing hero? A loner with nowhere else to go? They don't know. All they've got is that note and a town that's alive because of him. Years pass, and the questions linger. They talk about Henry like a legend, half real, half myth, over coffee and cards. Some say he'll come back one day, step off that same dusty bus with a new plan. Others figure he's gone for good, lost to the wind like so many before him. It's not until 1990 that a Vegas reporter, a young guy with a knack for digging, catches wind of Willow Creek's revival and starts poking around. He tracks down records, talks to folks in other faded towns, and pieces together the truth about the man they just called Henry. His real name was Henry James Ellison. Back in the day, he'd been a big deal. An engineer in Chicago with a corner office, a hefty paycheck, and a sprawling house in the suburbs. He had a wife, Margaret, who loved gardening, and a daughter, Emily, who'd just turned 10. Then in 1975, it all crashed, literally. A drunk driver plowed through an intersection one rainy night, and Henry lost them both. He was in the car, too, walked away with a busted arm and a heart that never healed. After that, he unraveled. Quit his job, sold the house, gave away anything that reminded him of them. He started drifting, a ghost in his own life, moving from town to town with no clear direction, until he found a purpose. Willow Creek wasn't his first save. The reporter digs up stories of 3 other towns, 2 in the Midwest, 1 down in New Mexico, all pulled back from the brink by a quiet man with a suitcase and a knack for fixing what's broken. He'd roll in, spend his savings, rally the locals, then vanish once the job was done. No fame, no thanks, just a trail of better places left behind. Willow Creek was his last stop, at least as far as anyone can tell. The cash he'd sunk into it drained what was left of his old life, but he didn't seem to care. That note, "This was never about me," wasn't just a goodbye, it was a confession. Maybe he was chasing redemption, trying to build something good to balance the loss he couldn't fix. Maybe he saw Margaret and Emily in every nail he hammered, every roof he patched. Or maybe he just couldn't stand to see another thing die. The reporter can't find him after 1985. No death certificate, no sightings, just a blank space where Henry used to be. Some in Willow Creek like to think he's still out there, wandering the back roads, looking for the next town to save. Today, Willow Creek's still kicking. It's no Vegas, but it's alive. A little slice of history that draws crowds every summer. Tourists snap photos by the steam engine, kids splash in the creek panning for fool's gold, and the diners packed with folks swapping stories over slices of Mrs. Carter's pecan pie. Those 50 holdouts from 1982? They're 100 now, maybe more. Shopkeepers, tour guides, parents raising kids who'll grow up knowing this place is home. They still talk about Henry, pointing out the saloon porch he fixed or the schoolhouse roof he climbed to patch. He's their quiet hero, a name whispered with a mix of awe and gratitude, even if they'll never know the whole story. It's a hell of a thing to think about, isn't it? One guy, no ties, no reason to care, stepping in to rewrite a town's ending. It makes you wonder who's out there right now, unnoticed, carrying a suitcase full of hope for a place no one else believes in. Maybe it's someone you've passed on the street, someone whose story you'll never hear. Henry didn't need the spotlight, he just needed to leave something behind that mattered.